Houston, Texas, a city of towering skyscrapers, booming oil fortunes, and gated suburban mansions. In one of these affluent neighborhoods, behind wrought iron gates and perfectly manicured lawns, stood the Carter residence. A lavish home, a picture-perfect family, and a life that many would envy. At the heart of it all was Olivia Carter, a 30-year-old wife and mother who, on the surface, had it all. She was married to Daniel Carter, a highly successful real estate mogul. They had a beautiful daughter, Emma, and lived in a multi-million-dollar estate with a backyard pool and marble floors that gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers. But behind the elegance, behind the facade of perfection, Olivia was drowning in loneliness. Daniel was the kind of man who thrived in boardrooms, not in living rooms. His business empire consumed his days and his nights. His calendar was filled with meetings in New York, business trips to Dubai, and weekend golf outings with investors. When he was home, he was still working, answering emails, pacing the balcony with his phone pressed to his ear, closing another lucrative deal. In the early days, Olivia had been madly in love with him. They met in college, the classic romance of a small-town girl swept off her feet by a charismatic, ambitious man. When he proposed on a private yacht in Miami, she thought she was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't last. Olivia wasn't naive. She understood the world she had married into. The wives of wealthy, powerful men were accessories, not priorities. Their marriages were built on status, not devotion. They had designer handbags, diamond rings, charity luncheons, but no real companionship. She played the role she was expected to play. She was the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the poised hostess. She attended every gala, smiled at every photo op, and made sure Emma's childhood was nothing short of magical. But at night, when the house was silent and empty, she sat alone in the vast living room, waiting. She waited for the sound of the front door unlocking, for the footsteps of a husband who was almost always too busy to be present. And when he finally arrived, all she got was a tired nod, a quick kiss on the cheek, and the same obligatory question. "How was your day?" It wasn't a real question. It was routine. He wasn't really listening. She told herself it would get better, that he would one day realize how much he was neglecting her. But as the business trips stretched longer, as the late nights became more frequent, as the silences between them grew heavier, Olivia understood a painful truth. Broken heart, she had become a stranger in her own marriage. And in that loneliness, in that aching void, a door was about to open, a door that should have never been opened. Houston, Texas, the city where money moves fast and relationships often struggle to keep up. For Olivia Carter, life in the affluent suburbs was supposed to be a dream. A beautiful home, a loving husband, a perfect family. But as each day passed, that dream felt more like a carefully staged illusion. She had spent years convincing herself that things would get better, that Daniel would change, that he would come home earlier, that he would look at her the way he used to. But hope is a fragile thing, and over time, hers had been worn down to nothing. Daniel was always gone. Even when he was physically home, he wasn't really there. Most nights, Olivia found herself alone in their grand, modern home, 5,000 square feet of space that felt more like a museum than a home. It had everything money could buy: imported Italian furniture, a state-of-the-art kitchen, a pool with an infinity edge. But none of it meant anything when she had no one to share it with. The master bedroom, once a sanctuary for them both, had become just another empty space. She had spent too many nights curled up on her side of the bed, staring at the untouched pillow next to her, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. She used to stay up, waiting for him. Now, she had stopped bothering. She would wake up to find him already dressed, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air as he rushed off to another meeting, another deal, another obligation more important than his marriage. The worst part? She had stopped being angry. She wasn't even surprised anymore. When they first got married, Daniel had been charming, attentive, affectionate, obsessed with her. He would send her flowers just because. He would text her in the middle of the day to say he missed her. They would stay up late talking, making plans for their future, dreaming together. Now, the text had stopped. The flowers were a thing of the past. Their conversations had dwindled down to brief exchanges of logistical information, bills, schedules, their daughter's school events. I have a dinner meeting tonight. Can you pick up Emma from ballet? I'll be home late. Don't wait up. She knew all marriages went through phases. She had read the self-help books, the articles about keeping the spark alive. She had tried everything: romantic dinners, surprise weekend getaways, even lingerie that made her feel ridiculous standing alone in front of the mirror. But nothing worked. Daniel was already gone. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. He had checked out long ago. Olivia had never felt lonelier than she did in her own marriage. Friends envied her life, but they only saw what she allowed them to see. To the outside world, she was the woman who had it all. The perfect house, the perfect child, the perfect husband. At PTA meetings and charity luncheons, she played her role flawlessly, nodding along as the other wives complained about their husbands' annoying habits, as if a husband being forgetful or messy was the worst thing that could happen in a marriage. They didn't understand. Olivia wasn't mad at Daniel because he left dirty dishes in the sink. She was mad because he had left her, mentally, emotionally, completely. At night, she would scroll through old photos on her phone, pictures from their honeymoon, their first Christmas together, Emma's first birthday party. She searched for evidence that the love they once had was real. But looking at those photos now felt like staring at strangers. She used to believe in the fairy tale. Now, she wasn't sure she even believed in love anymore. There were nights when Olivia wondered if Daniel was seeing someone else. The thought had started creeping into her mind months ago. At first as a whisper, a paranoia she dismissed. But as time went on, the signs became harder to ignore. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way he would turn his phone screen away from her when he got a text, the way he always smelled like hotel soap when he came home from business trips. She never confronted him, because deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. If she asked and he lied, it would break her. If she asked and he told the truth, it would destroy everything. So she stayed silent. She let the doubt fester, let it eat away at the remaining pieces of love she still had for him. And in that silence, the loneliness grew. There is a moment in every failing marriage when one person realizes that they are completely, utterly alone. For Olivia, that moment came one evening when she heard a crash from the kitchen. Emma, their 6-year-old daughter, had tried to reach for a glass of water on the counter and knocked a plate to the floor. She stood frozen, eyes wide, waiting for someone to come running. Daniel was nowhere to be found. And for the first time, Olivia truly saw her life for what it was. A husband who was never home. A daughter who was growing up in a house filled with silence. A woman who had given everything to a marriage that no longer existed. She kneeled down, picked up the broken shards of porcelain, and held Emma close. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's got it." But in that moment, she knew something had to change. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something she would never be able to undo. Because loneliness is a dangerous thing. And when someone feels invisible for too long, they will do anything to be seen. Loneliness is a quiet kind of suffering. It doesn't come with a dramatic explosion or a breaking point that you can pinpoint. Instead, it creeps in slowly, settling into the spaces between conversations that never happen, in the gaps of an empty bed, in the silence of a house too big for just one person. For Olivia Carter, loneliness had become a companion, one she had learned to live with. Until one day, someone saw her. Someone noticed what Daniel never did. And that someone was Michael Carter, her father-in-law. Michael had always been part of Olivia's life, but never in a way that felt personal. As Daniel's father, he had been present at all the expected moments, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. He was a retired Houston police officer, a man who carried himself with quiet confidence, someone who had spent decades enforcing rules, keeping people in line, protecting others. In the past, Olivia had only seen him as her father-in-law, a man she respected but never really knew. But lately, Michael had been around more often. Daniel's frequent absences had made it impossible for him to fulfill his role as a father to Emma, so Michael had stepped in. He would pick him up from school when Olivia was busy, take her out for ice cream, help with her math homework. He filled the spaces Daniel had left behind. And in doing so, he had become part of Olivia's routine. At first, it was just polite conversation. Small talk over coffee in the kitchen while Emma played outside. But soon, those conversations grew deeper. He listened, not in the way Daniel did, where every question felt like a formality, an obligation to check in before moving on to something more important. Michael listened as if what she said mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt seen. One evening, as Olivia was preparing dinner, Michael walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment before speaking. "You look tired," he said, his voice low, concerned. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I am." Michael didn't pry. He didn't ask the kinds of questions that demanded answers she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he nodded and simply said, "You don't have to do everything on your own, you know." It was such a simple statement, but it was the first time in years that someone had acknowledged how much weight she was carrying. And that's when it happened. The shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden, but something between them had changed. And Olivia knew, deep down, she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. There are moments in life that seem small, insignificant at first. A glance held for a second too long. A conversation that lingers past the point where it should end. A simple touch that sends a ripple through something deep inside. For Olivia Carter, those moments had begun adding up. She told herself that it was harmless, that it was just conversation, just company, just a connection she desperately needed. But deep down, she knew better. It started with the way he looked at her. Michael had always been polite, respectful, the way a father-in-law should be. But lately, there was something else in his eyes when he spoke to her. Something that made Olivia's skin warm, something that sent a pulse of electricity through the space between them. He noticed things Daniel never did. "You cut your hair. That dress looks nice on you. You seem happier today." And maybe she was, because when Michael was around, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in years, wanted. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Michael was in the kitchen, fixing a cup of coffee. Olivia reached for something in the cabinet above him, stretching on her toes, unsteady. He caught her, his hands instinctively reaching for her waist, steadying her. For just a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Her heart pounded. His grip lingered just a second too long. And then, as if nothing had happened, he let go. But Olivia felt it, and she knew so did he. After that, it was subtle. The way he stood a little closer when they talked. The way his fingers brushed against hers when he handed her something. The way her pulse quickened whenever they were alone. She told herself it was nothing. But if it was nothing, then why did she find herself looking forward to seeing him? Why did she feel that rush of anticipation when she heard his voice in the house? She had spent years feeling invisible. Now someone saw her, and that feeling was intoxicating. One evening, as they sat on the patio watching Emma play, Michael turned to her and said softly, "You deserve to be happy, Olivia." Her breath caught, because the way he said it didn't feel like a father-in-law speaking to his son's wife. It felt like something else. She knew she should shut it down. She should stand up, walk away, tell herself this was wrong. But she didn't. Instead, she held his gaze, letting the silence stretch between them. Because in that moment, she wanted this. And she knew, deep in her bones, this wasn't going to stop. There was no single moment when Olivia Carter officially crossed the line. No dramatic confession, no impulsive decision that sealed her fate. Instead, it was a slow descent, a collection of small choices that, on their own, seemed harmless. A lingering glance here, a fleeting touch there, a conversation that ran too late into the night. Until, one day, Olivia looked up and realized there was no turning back. It started with a text. "Couldn't sleep. Thinking about you." The message came at 1:17 a.m. From Michael. Olivia sat in bed, staring at the screen, her heart hammering in her chest. She should have ignored it. She should have deleted it. She should have stopped this before it started. Instead, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as she typed. "Me too." And just like that, the door that had been cracked open was now wide open. They were careful at first. The stolen moments happened in plain sight, yet just out of reach. A conversation that lasted a little too long in the kitchen. A soft laugh shared in the backyard. A gaze that lingered when no one else was looking. They never touched. Not at first. But the tension between them was a living thing, growing stronger, pulling them closer. And then came the first real lie. One afternoon, as Olivia was heading out the door, Daniel called. "Where are you going?" She hesitated, just a second too long. Before responding, "Just running some errands." But she wasn't going to the store. She was going to meet Michael. And for the first time in her marriage, she didn't feel guilty about lying. It was a rainy evening when everything changed. Emma was staying at a friend's house for the night. Daniel was on a business trip in Los Angeles. The house was empty, and Olivia knew Michael was home. Her hands were shaking when she knocked on his door. Not from fear, but from anticipation. He opened it within seconds, as if he had been waiting for her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he stepped aside, silently inviting her in. And Olivia, without a word, crossed the threshold. The moment the door shut behind her, she knew. This was it, the point of no return. And yet, she wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Because love and destruction, they often look the same at the beginning. And Olivia was just getting started. At first, it was intoxicating. The thrill of secrecy. The rush of knowing she was breaking every rule. Yet somehow, she had never felt more alive. Every glance, every whisper, every stolen moment with Michael Carter sent an electric pulse through Olivia's veins. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a mother. She wasn't just the woman waiting at home for a husband who barely saw her. She was desired. She was wanted. She was dangerous. And she loved it. The affair became a rhythm, a pattern, a secret dance woven into Olivia's everyday life. During the day, she played her role perfectly. She packed Emma's lunch. She showed up to PTA meetings. She smiled at Daniel when he came home, pretending everything was exactly the same. But in the quiet moments, the ones that no one else saw, she was someone else entirely. A woman who met Michael in the back seat of his car behind the country club. A woman who pressed her body against his in dimly lit hotel rooms outside the city. A woman who answered his texts in the middle of the night, biting her lip to keep from waking her husband. It was reckless. It was risky. But Olivia had spent so long being invisible. Now, she couldn't stand the thought of being unseen again. But with every high, there was a crash. Late at night, when she lay beside Daniel, his slow, steady breathing filling the silence, the weight of her choices settled on her chest. She would turn and look at him. This man she had once loved, this man who had given her everything. And for just a moment, she would wonder, what am I doing? How did I get here? How will this end? But then morning would come, and the moment she saw Michael again, the guilt would fade into nothing. Because nothing else mattered when he was near. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. And Olivia had been careful. But she wasn't careful enough. Daniel was no fool. He might have been distant, distracted, consumed by work, but he wasn't blind. He started to notice the small things. The way Olivia's phone was always turned screen side down. The way she smiled at messages she never let him see. The way she suddenly had places to be that she never used to go. A seed of suspicion had been planted. And soon, that seed was going to grow into something deadly. Daniel Carter was no fool. He may have been distracted by work, buried in his business deals, and emotionally absent in his marriage. But he wasn't blind. At first, he ignored the small things. The way Olivia checked her phone more often, always angling the screen away. The way she stopped complaining about his late nights, as if she no longer cared whether he was home or not. The way she seemed lighter, almost happier. A man who is truly loved knows it. And Daniel? He no longer felt loved. It wasn't just her behavior. It was her entire presence. The way she dressed had changed. Not dramatically, but in subtle ways he couldn't ignore. She started putting more effort into her appearance, even on days when she had nowhere to go. Her perfume was stronger, her hair always done, her outfits a little more flattering than before. At first, he thought maybe she was just trying to reignite something in their marriage, a desperate, last-ditch effort to save what was left. But then he realized She never dressed up for him. If anything, she barely even looked at him anymore. It wasn't just Daniel who noticed. Family members, friends, even some of their house staff had started exchanging knowing glances when Olivia walked into her room. One afternoon, while at the country club, Daniel overheard two women whispering. She's been seen with someone, but it's not just anyone. Who? A long pause. Then, the other woman lowered her voice. Michael Carter. Daniel's blood ran cold. His father? No, it couldn't be. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But now, the suspicion in his gut wasn't just a fleeting paranoia. Now it was real. Daniel didn't confront Olivia right away. Instead, he did something much worse. He watched. He started coming home at unexpected hours, trying to catch her off guard. He checked her car mileage, noting extra miles that couldn't be explained. He even installed a security camera at their front door, not telling Olivia. And every single thing he found confirmed his worst fears. Then one night he checked her phone records. There it was. Late-night calls. Repeated numbers. A familiar name. Michael Carter. A father shouldn't be calling his daughter-in-law at midnight. And that's when Daniel knew. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. And soon it was going to explode. Secrets don't stay buried forever. At first, Olivia thought she was being careful. But the thing about living a double life is that, eventually, the cracks start to show. And Daniel Carter was starting to see the cracks. A change in Olivia. It wasn't just the late nights, or the way Olivia suddenly started dressing differently. It was the way she changed. She smiled at her phone too much. She laughed in a way she hadn't in years. She looked at him less and less. But when she did, there was something missing in her eyes. Daniel wasn't sure when he had first felt it, that creeping sensation in the pit of his stomach, the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was when Olivia stopped complaining about his work trips. Maybe it was when she started looking happier when he wasn't home. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in their marriage, Olivia had secrets. And Daniel? He hated secrets. The first real clue came by accident. One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen and found Olivia's phone buzzing on the counter. The screen lit up for just a second before it faded to black. A name. Michael. His father. Daniel's stomach twisted. It could have been nothing. His father and Olivia talked all the time, especially with Emma in the picture. But something felt wrong. Olivia came in seconds later, and the way she grabbed the phone, quickly, almost defensively, confirmed his worst fears. "Who was that?" he asked casually. "Just Michael," Olivia replied too quickly. Too rehearsed. Daniel nodded, pretending not to notice. But from that moment on, he started watching. Suspicion became obsession. Daniel started paying attention to every detail, every small inconsistency. He noticed how Olivia texted more than usual, but always turned her screen away. He noticed how she suddenly started locking the bedroom door when she showered. He noticed how she smelled different, like cologne that wasn't his. And then one night, Daniel got his proof. The text that changed everything. It was 1:43 a.m. when Olivia's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She was asleep. Daniel, heart pounding, reached over and grabbed the phone. A message preview flashed across the screen. "Michael, I can't stop thinking about tonight." Daniel froze. His blood turned to ice. Everything inside him screamed that he had to be wrong, that there had to be some other explanation. But deep down, he knew. He knew exactly what this meant. And in that moment, something inside Daniel snapped. He wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was certain. And now, he was going to find the truth, no matter what it took. Rage is a strange thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It simmers, slowly boiling under the surface, building with every unanswered question, every lingering doubt, every whispered lie. For Daniel Carter, rage didn't come in a violent outburst. It came in cold, calculated silence. Because now, he knew the truth. And he wasn't going to confront Olivia until he had proof. The next morning, Daniel woke up before Olivia, but he didn't say a word. He watched her move through their home, fixing breakfast for Emma, sipping her coffee, smiling like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't sleeping with his father. Daniel's hands clenched under the table, his grip tightening around the ceramic mug in his palm. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, he waited. He watched. For the next few days, Daniel became a ghost in his own home. He was quieter, more observant. He didn't pick fights, didn't act out, didn't let Olivia see what was brewing inside him. Instead, he started putting the pieces together. He checked their shared phone records, saw the late-night calls between Olivia and Michael. He found bank statements, hotel charges that didn't belong to him. He noted the subtle shifts, how Olivia's perfume lingered on her clothes differently, how she left the house more often, always with a vague excuse. And then, finally, he set a trap. On a Wednesday evening, Daniel told Olivia he had a late meeting downtown. She barely looked up from her phone when she replied, "Okay, see you later." But Daniel didn't leave. Instead, he parked his car down the street and waited. And an hour later, right on cue, Michael's car pulled into their driveway. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched his own father step out of the car and walk to his front door. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He just walked inside, like he had done it before, like he belonged there. Daniel's vision blurred as rage took over, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Daniel didn't remember getting out of the car. He didn't remember slamming the front door open, or the way Olivia gasped in shock when she saw him standing there, his entire body vibrating with anger. All he remembered was Michael standing too close to his wife. And then everything went red. Daniel lunged. The sound of Olivia's screaming barely registered as his fists connected with his father's face, sending Michael stumbling backward. The betrayal. The lies. The months of deception. Daniel's vision tunneled, every muscle in his body moving on pure, unfiltered rage. And then, in a single violent moment, Michael hit the ground, and he didn't get back up. Silence. The only sound in the room was Olivia's ragged breathing, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth in horror. Michael lay still, too still. Daniel's chest heaved, his fists still clenched, his knuckles covered in blood. He didn't mean to, but it was too late. And in that moment, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Everything had gone silent. No screaming, no crying, just silence. Daniel Carter stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched, blood dripping from his knuckles onto the polished hardwood floor. At his feet, Michael Carter lay motionless. His father, his wife's lover, the man he had just killed. Across the room, Olivia couldn't move. She was still standing where she had been when Daniel burst through the door. Caught in the act, her betrayal laid bare. But the moment she saw Michael's body hit the ground, her breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God!" "Daniel!" Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. But Daniel didn't look at her. He couldn't. Because if he did, if he saw the horror in her eyes, the regret, the broken pieces of whatever they once had, he knew he would lose it completely. And he wasn't done yet. Suddenly, Olivia saw something in his face that terrified her more than anything else. The anger wasn't gone. It was still there. And now, it was focused on her. Daniel took a step forward. Olivia took a step back. "You lied to me." His voice was eerily calm, but his hands were still shaking. "You betrayed me." "Daniel, please." She raised her hands, trying to keep distance between them. But there was nowhere to run. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then Daniel lunged, not with fists, not with violence, but with words sharp enough to tear through her. "You destroyed our family for this?" His voice cracked, raw with pain. "For my father?" Olivia had no words. She had played out scenarios in her head. What would happen if they got caught? If Daniel found out? If everything came crashing down? But nothing had prepared her for this. For the man she once loved looking at her like she was a stranger, like she was nothing. Then, as suddenly as his rage had exploded, it was gone. Daniel stepped back. His breathing slowed. His face hardened. And in that moment, Olivia knew she had already lost him. Whatever was left of their marriage, their life together, it had died the second Michael hit the ground. Daniel turned toward the door. "Call the cops." His voice was flat, emotionless. And then he walked away, leaving Olivia alone in the wreckage of what they had once been. Minutes later, the sirens arrived. The flashing red and blue lights filled the windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Olivia stood beside Michael's lifeless body, numb. Daniel sat on the porch steps, his hands still covered in blood, staring blankly ahead. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. Because this wasn't just about what he had done. It was about everything that led to it. And as the officers approached, placing him in handcuffs, he whispered the only thought running through his mind. It was already over before tonight. The flashing red and blue lights cast long, pulsing shadows across the Carter home. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in hushed tones, peering over fences, watching as the perfect family unraveled before their eyes. Inside, Olivia stood frozen, numb, cold, empty. Just minutes ago, her entire world had been built on a fragile lie. Now, it lay in pieces around her. And at the center of it all, Michael Carter, lifeless on the floor. Her secret, her sin, her undoing. Outside, Daniel didn't fight. He sat on the front steps, his hands still stained with his father's blood, his breathing steady. He didn't resist when the officers approached. He didn't flinch when they pulled his arms behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Daniel Carter, you're under arrest for the murder of Michael Carter. The words barely registered. He already knew his fate, because deep down, he understood. This night had been years in the making. His father had betrayed him. His wife had betrayed him. And now, he was paying the price for all of it. Olivia's world collapses. Olivia stood in the doorway, watching as the officers led Daniel away. His face was unreadable. No anger, no regret, no fight, just emptiness. And that was what scared her the most. Because despite everything, despite the secrets, the lies, the affair, she had never wanted this. She had never imagined it would end this way. Tears blurred her vision as Daniel stepped into the police car, the door slamming shut with a finality that sent a shiver through her spine. This was it, the end of everything. The weeks that followed were a media frenzy. The Carter family scandal exploded across every news outlet. Houston real estate mogul arrested for murder in love triangle gone wrong. Betrayal, lies, and blood. The tragic fall of the Carter dynasty. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to know. Was it murder or was it justice? Daniel's legal team argued temporary insanity, a crime of passion, a moment of blind rage fueled by betrayal. The prosecution pushed for second-degree murder, a calculated act of revenge. In the end, the court ruled somewhere in between. Daniel Carter was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a fate that might have felt unfair if he hadn't already accepted it. But the world hadn't forgotten about Olivia. She hadn't pulled the trigger. She hadn't thrown a punch. But she was the reason this had happened. And in the court of public opinion, she was just as guilty. The state charged her with adultery and reckless endangerment, pushing for the harshest punishment available. At first, the judge considered the death penalty, a fate that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. But in a twist no one expected, Daniel intervened. He pleaded for her life. Despite everything, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, he asked for mercy. And the court listened. Olivia's sentence was reduced to 10 years in prison. Still a decade behind bars. Still a future shattered beyond repair. But at least she would live. By the time the dust settled, there was nothing left. The Carter name had been ruined. Their empire had crumbled. Their daughter, Emma, had lost both of her parents. Daniel sat in a prison cell, staring at the gray concrete walls, wondering how it had come to this. Olivia lay awake at night in a different cell, replaying every mistake, asking herself if it had been worth it. And Michael Carter? Dead, buried 6 feet under, his secrets rotting with him. People say affairs are thrilling. People say they bring passion back into a dying life. But Olivia knew the truth now. Affairs don't make you feel alive. They make you watch your world burn. And once the fire starts, there's no way to stop it. In the end, there were no winners in this story. Only lives shattered, reputations destroyed, and a daughter left to grow up without the parents who had once promised her the world. Olivia Carter, once the woman who had it all, now spends her days behind bars, trapped not just by the walls around her, but by the memories of the choices that led her here. Daniel Carter, once a powerful man, now reduced to an inmate, serving his time for a crime fueled by betrayal and rage. But was he truly the villain, or simply a man pushed too far? And Michael Carter, a man who betrayed his own blood, now buried beneath the weight of his own sins. Perhaps the only true justice served. It all started with a secret, a stolen moment, a choice that should have never been made. Was it love? Was it lust? Or was it simply the inevitable result of a marriage built on empty promises? One thing is certain, some mistakes, once made, can never be undone. What do you think? Was Daniel justified? Should Olivia have gotten a harsher sentence? Let us know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more real-life crime stories.